Video 41 photo.
Go.
Roger, don't bother to change your tape. Stop your tape when you give you the word and telephoto 93 and restart it prior to Y9191.
I guess we're all set now.
Well, no need. Video 12 reported he was giving me a turnaround reading.
Yeah.
And he reports that focus stop it is D50, so we concur beautifully.
Right, we're reading about 5.3 also on hard clip.
Roger, thank you.
All right, Bonnie. Feed the cats. I don't want.
Sporty! Memo, come here, Sporty. Memo, come here. Come here, my little peapod. Yes, here you go. Go ahead, eat.
Engineers of the Boeing Company and the National Aeronautics and Space Administration are making final preparations to launch one of a series of lunar orbiters. The satellite's primary mission is to photograph landing areas on the moon for America's astronauts. An Atlas Agena booster will launch the orbiter from Cape Kennedy.
Yes, I know. You're my little moot pie. In the 1980s, when I was working on the Space Exploration Initiative, a friend had given me 5 rolls of microfilm of every image from a program called Lunar Orbiter. This is 5 spacecraft that went around the moon in the 1960s and did photo reconnaissance for the Apollo program. And I'm looking at these images, and they're fabulous.
These 5 lunar orbiter spacecraft were sent to the moon in 1966, 1967 as recon spacecraft to look down at the moon and help find landing sites for the Apollo spacecraft.
When orbital speed and altitude are achieved, the Atlas booster and nose shroud will separate, and the Agena will fire to place itself and the lunar orbiter into a 100-mile-high orbit around the Earth. Soon after burnout, Agena separates, and the 850-pound orbiter will be on its way. Now speeding through space at 25,000 miles per hour, the vehicle will extend its two-way Earth communication antennas. And solar panels will open to capture and convert the sun's energy into electrical power for orbiter's systems. They will be able to lower the vehicle's orbit to a close 28 miles for photography of the moon's surface.
The television or electronic cameras at the time simply were not up to the resolution. They just couldn't do it. So they came up with this way of sending real cameras, and when I say real, it means chemical film and so forth, to lunar orbit, took the pictures.
One lens will cover an area of 25 square miles and record objects as small as a card table. The other will make overlapping photographs of 440 square mile sections. During its mission, the lunar orbiter will take 160 pairs of pictures while filming 12,000 square miles.
The film was chemically processed in a dark room by a spacecraft, which was really a robot, but didn't even have a brain. The photos were then scanned with a photocell. An analog image was sent back to Earth. And then it was shown on a kinescope screen, a high-resolution TV screen, photographed.
Incoming photographic information from the orbiter is fed into this equipment where electronic wizardry converts the electronic signal to a pinpoint of light of varying intensity. The tiny beam sweeps back and forth, exposing a moving strip of 35-millimeter film. When processed, the resulting negative shows what the orbiter's camera saw. Most of the 18 miles of film will be sent to a reassembly facility. where the strips will be developed and arranged into large negatives. Prints of these negatives will form the basis for lunar maps. This data is vital to landing men on the moon.
But somebody had the forethought of saying, well, maybe we should record these, and they recorded them on these analog data tapes. Rarely were they looked at after that.
The film record, which is a 35 millimeter film, had a dynamic range of about 250 to 1. And for the digerati, that's about 8 bits. But the original 70 millimeter film on the spacecraft had a dynamic range of 1,000 to 1. And the magnetic tapes, which is a direct scan from the spacecraft down, had not been degraded. It still retained 1,000 to 1 dynamic range. So that's about 10 bits, but that's 4 times the dynamic range of the film. So I'm going, where are these?
As a matter of fact, they made 5 complete sets, some 1,500 tapes per set. But all but one set eventually were recycled or destroyed or whatever.
So in 2007, the internet's around, and I'm reading on an aerospace blog one night, and somebody posts that says there's this woman, her name is Nancy Evans, she was a Viking project manager for archiving, and she has these tape drives from Lunar Orbiter, and she's retiring, and she wants to give them away. I'm like, oh my God.
We hear these rumors on the internet about some woman with tape drives in her garage and these tapes and all that.
So I get on an airplane and I go to California and I meet Nancy, who lives on a horse property. She'd become a holistic veterinarian after NASA, and she had these tape drives. So we call up Pete Worden, who's now up at NASA Ames as center director, and says, can we bring it up there? So she said yes.
Dennis and some of his colleagues came to us and said, you know, there's some really cool data that we took in the 1960s. We can resurrect it with much improved quality that now we can use to really study the moon, and in some sense it's a time machine.
I remember getting the call from Keith Cowing, who's been a friend of mine for years, and he told me about this, and I thought, wow, isn't that cool? And I thought, you know, in the current NASA environment, how much chance of success does it have? But I thought, count me in.
So Keith Cowing from NASA Watch puts up the money, and we rent 2 trucks.
And we get there with our big trucks, and there were the tape drives with farm animals running around, and they'd just been sitting in a nice dry, climate for 20 years. We'd gotten permission from NASA to get the tapes, got the tapes, threw them on a truck, drove up to NASA Ames, and eventually we got a place to work on these things.
We were looking at a place to do this at NASA Ames, and one of the ladies there said, well, you know, there's this McDonald's that just closed here, and they have these French fryers there that sucks the air out really rapidly, and since you're going to be soldering, wouldn't that be a good place to do it? And we're going, well, yeah, that makes sense, and nobody else wanted to be in the building. So we said, well, let's go move into the McDonald's.
McDonald's had just cleared out, and so I made the suggestion, why don't we move into McDonald's? And it turned out that that was the perfect place for them to be, and it had just the right kind of accommodations for their early work.
I remember eating here when I was in the Air Force, when it was a military base, and this was the McDonald's franchise. And I can't think of a better use of old McDonald's than to be a place that we study old data from the moon and with new data. In fact, the place is called McMoons.
Okay, how about a quarter pounder with cheese and a medium coffee?
Cream and sugar?
Yes, sir. Cream and sugar. I'm sorry, dude.
Chicken out. You don't have to take picture from the restaurant, please.
Oh, this is for a documentary. We own a McDonald's. Thank you.
I used to come to this when it was a McDonald's. Oh, really? Not too often, I have to say, yeah. For obvious reasons, right. But yeah.
There's something about McDonald's that's such an American cultural icon that people have just really loved it. And we've been able to do things like last year we crowdfunded almost $100,000 because we're in an abandoned McDonald's.
41 photo.
Go.
Roger, don't bother change your tape. Stop your tape when you give you the word, and telephoto 93 and restart it prior to wide angle 91. Such that you have sufficient tape to terminate readout.
That's a good idea. Will do.
Roger.
Okay, Glass. Record a video. Okay, today we're recording a video using Google Glass and looking at our FR900 video tape recorder. And what we see right here is our head. And we're looking very closely at our FR900 head that's crucial to making the entire Lunar Orbiter Image Recovery Project work.
We had, tape drives that hadn't operated in 30, 40 years, tapes that we had no idea the condition thereof, but we apparently had the entire collection of all 5 lunar orbiter missions. I mean, it was abundantly. If you just look at the sheer number of these tapes, you do the math, and we go, my God, we have it's like having one wing of the Library of Alexandria suddenly dropped in your lap, and you just have to figure out the card catalog. That was the hard part. So here we go. Here we go. Here's our image coming back. Takes a few seconds. So now we're looking at the high-resolution image of the moon again. And you can see craters. You can see all kinds of stuff. Now think about this. I've been doing this for 5.5 years, and I've recorded probably 95% of these tapes. And so I have seen probably every spot on the moon at least once. Again, this machine's 45 years old and not everything works correctly. There's brakes on these reels that will stop it, but this one's broken, so I actually have to physically grab the reel, and then when I hit stop, I use my hand to create enough friction to where the tape will stop. Now we're starting again. We're looking at the moon, and I can tell you right here that what we're looking at, and I'm going to turn this noise down here for right now, is a high-resolution image. And a high-resolution image on Lunar Orbiter 4 was about 40 to 100 meters. So these craters here, the very smallest craters that you can see in these images, are about 40 to 50 meters across. It's much less resolution than the other lunar orbiters, Lunar Orbiter 1, 2, 3, and even 5, because what they did on Lunar Orbiter 4 is the first 3 missions, they accomplished their photo reconnaissance mission. And when they accomplished the photo reconnaissance mission, they're going, what else can we do? We still have 2 spacecraft, or actually they had 3, they never flew the last one. And so they put this one in a different orbit. They put it into a polar orbit at a higher altitude that allowed them to map a lot of the lunar surface. And so this is really cool from a science perspective, because the moon was actually mapped from before the Earth was completely mapped from space. So it's like way cool.
How do you restore something like that? You know, I mean, you have tubes, you have old stuff in them that technology is bypassed decades ago.
The NASA people weren't very sure that there was even anything on the tapes after 40 years.
And then we started to realize that there were things missing, like there was no demodulator in the tape drive. And as far as we could tell, the schematics were sort of classified. So we had to figure out how to reverse engineer this, and eventually, due to the fact that this program was heavily documented.
And we had some retired engineers who were geniuses, a gentleman by the name of Al Sturm, who recreated the demodulator from block diagrams and mathematical equations, which allowed us to read the rest of the tapes.
But we needed somebody to run the tape drives. So we stumbled upon Ken Zinn, and again, another coincidence.
So when they looked at the machine, they realized it wasn't like, a VHS machine, throw a tape in there and push the button. There's a lot of connections, a lot of wires, pile of manuals, and didn't know where to start at. They wouldn't get one tape off of any of this stuff. It wasn't for myself and to rebuild the machine, and Al to build the demodulator and build a scan converter like that for us. But without that, you wouldn't have one damn picture.
How we did this and how we brought the machine back to life, we had a bunch of students as young as 13, 14 years old washing the electronics. They would actually bathe the power supplies in water, and they're going, well, this will work. And Ken, who'd done this a lot, said, oh yeah, it'll work.
So I also had 3 kids that were off for the summer, And rather than have them stay home and play video games, I volunteered them to come over and to help wash the equipment.
I think one of the memories I have that's most like fresh in my mind is they gave me this whole circuitry thing that would go into one of the machines, and they took me to the back and they told me to just spray it, just soak it down, and that had just like roared with everything that I knew about circuitry, and I was just freaking out the whole time. It's like my face was probably like a permanent cringe the entire time this is going on. But Ken's like, no, just throw it in the sink and spray it, it's fine. And so.
Now here we have Keith going to take and blast with water this 90-volt power supply so we can clean it up. This is all part of our refurbishing process.
This is how the professionals do it.
Yeah, we thought it was insane when we first heard about it, but it makes perfect sense, and we've already proven it works because our previously washed power supplies are all working just fine. We worked very hard, and over a 3-month period, we got the tape drives back working. And we were very lucky to find an analog tape that had already been demodulated, and the very first image that came out was the most famous image of the 1960s. It's called Earthrise, the very first picture of the Earth ever taken from space.
The signal is a television signal coming off the spacecraft, and what that means is that it's relayed line by line by line, and those lines are stacked sequentially to form one image. It's a long, narrow strip. And these long, narrow strips are then assembled side by side to form the complete frame. So in a high-resolution frame, we'll have about 90 of those small strips called framelets. And in a medium-resolution frame, we'll have about a third of that. So, so far we've captured about 100,000 of these strips of images.
We now have finished the capturing of all of the images off the tapes, which is the most difficult part, because it's one thing to get a 40-year-old tape drive running. It's another thing to keep it running for 5 years. These are going to be all on a public website so people can download our multi-gigabyte images. And people all over the world have been downloading them. And so this is part of what I wanted to do is public science, crowd-funded science. The American people spent the equivalent of today, $120 billion going to the moon. And in that era, they didn't have access to this. They'd see it on the news and something like this. But today, with the internet and all, we own these images. They're part of our heritage. And one of the interesting things about our project is we call ourselves techno-archaeologists, which is literally the archaeology of technology. And in that, we're going back and digging into our past, and we're showing this and preserving it for the future. And that has really struck a chord with people all over the world. Think about the lunar orbiters, and this is what I think about when I'm watching the images come by, and I watch them on the television screen every day. Before the lunar orbiters flew to the moon, mankind had never in all of its history seen the moon up close. And I'm seeing these images come down as the people saw them 40-something years ago. And I look at the craters and I look at the mountains, and I'm going, I can imagine myself living there. I can imagine people going there and doing things. And to not go there and do things would just be terribly tragic. And to me, the importance of these images are beautiful. The moon is beautiful. It's all rounded. The earth is beautiful because it has crags and trees and all this scenery. But on the moon, everything is smooth. It's all gray. It's very peaceful. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. And this is what we've been able to see. And when we make these images and one comes out, we just go, oh, wow. We can imagine ourselves in lunar orbit as the guy that was left in the Apollo when the 2 astronauts will go down to the surface. We can imagine what he saw going over the moon. And we see it's just, to us, it's just beauty. It's beautiful. And that's, to me, that's what life is about as much as it is engineering or anything else. It's just beautiful. Keith, come here. This right here, one of the funniest things I've ever seen is in this building, a picture of Keith and Dan.
Oh, yes. They want everybody to come around.
I'm gonna run get my camera. I want to take a picture. He's looking how faded the pirate flag is now.
That shows how long this has been.
It does.
Congratulations.
Thank you, sir.
Fabulous stuff.
Yeah.
Great, thanks.
Congratulations.
Well, you remember
Ken. Awesome.
when we were driving